My name is Eric J. Guignard, and I've primarily been a short story author for the past several years. I'm also the editor of a couple of anthologies, which are for sale at the Horror Writers Association table across the room. I recently have a novella, which will be coming out in 2 months, but you can also buy advanced copies there at the table.
So, again, thank everybody for joining us. We'll dive right in. Let's start off with, since we're talking about the classics in the horror genre, the first novel that really grabbed you. I don't mean that you just read it, you liked it, you set it aside, but the one that made you say, I want to write more. I want to be involved in this for a living. Eric, you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually going to totally twist your question around because it wasn't a novel for me, it was short stories. Growing up, I loved short stories, and I think it kind of tied into my earliest memories were watching black and white Twilight Zone episodes on TV, so I always appreciated short plots. So growing up, reading regular literature, O. Henry stories, Rudyard Kipling, I loved. And once I hit horror, first horror stories were Stephen King's early collections, and Night Shift, and Skeleton Crew. But what really opened my eyes to the genre were old anthology series called the Borderlands series, edited by Thomas Monteleone. And these books, I mean, he's still going on to this day with them. There's about 6 of them now. But they're just masterpieces of some of the sharpest, most bizarre, thought-provoking horror that you've ever read. And that was my introduction to Joe Lansdale, Bentley Little, Ramsey Campbell, David Silva, amongst many others.
Yeah, Tom, I was actually talking to him about putting together the Borderlands anthology. They take years to put together because he doesn't put one of these together until he has the perfect stories. And he actually said, and Tom's a best-selling novelist, he was like, I couldn't write a story good enough to get it.
Yeah.
So that's the meticulousness.
Well, him and I are alike in that regard, because I couldn't either. I found my rejection letter in the mail.
Paul?
Well, the first novel that I read that decided I want to do this for later, I've been writing this I think it was John Saul's Separate Children in 1977. I was 2 years old, I was 12, and I read it, and I reread it, and then I decided in that moment I want to be a horror writer. And years later I actually got to meet John Saul at an event I was doing, and it's telling that story, and that was, it's real, it's blind, that's not horror writer. But again, I connected many of the books that my good friend Eric said, and writes like Roald Dahl, who's mostly known for his children's stories. If you ever read his Tales Unexpected, which I read when I was like 13, 14, those are some of the twisted, most edgy, cleverly crafted tales ever put onto a page. And if people just know Roald Dahl from the kids stuff, go read Tales to the Unexpected. You'll be surprised and entertained, I guarantee. Yeah. Really twisted stuff. So, which inspired me really. So.
For me, it was 2 things. One, I had a grandfather who didn't believe in reading your typical children's books to us when he was reading us stories at night. He read The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. And when that's the last thing that you hear before you go to bed, it really has an impact. The first novel that I read, horror novel, that really stuck with me, and I've reread it many times, was actually Bram Stoker's Dracula. And my very first crush was Christopher Lee as Dracula. I was 13, he was 53, I thought it could work, so it all kind of
I love Christopher Lee. That was, I think that's the first time the vampire had fangs on film.
Right?
Yeah. Because if you go back and watch the Bela Lugosi, he just goes.
He wasn't sexy.
Yeah.
He did have a nice widow's peak.
I'm going to be cliche, because for me it was Stephen King. I think as a kid growing up in the 80s, you grow up on a steady diet of horror movies, and obviously King's name keeps popping up, but Salem's Lot, I read as a child. I don't know if anybody has read that novel here, but pick that up. That little kid scratching on the window will stick with you for life. I have probably a quarter of my brain dedicated to that little shit. And he comes to me at the worst possible moments. Avoid the Rob Lowe adaptation, but seek out the Toby Hooper one from the 70s with David Soul and James Mason. Really good adaptation.
I'm very second that, it really is.
Yeah. Try to get the miniseries for it. Okay, so we talked about our influence. If somebody came to you and they said, hey, I've always been a fan of horror movies, but I don't really know where I should start with horror literature. What would be the first thing you would recommend?
The first thing, I think one of the classics, of course everybody's seen the movie, it was a great movie, but Interview with the Vampire is
a good novel.
a wonderful novel. I mean, this was back in 1979 that it was originally written, so, and of course it still holds up today. It's timeless. Her prose is beautiful, gorgeous gothic setting, and actually I'm going to say a second novel as well, because tying to Stephen King, one of my all-time favorite horror novels is The Stand, which also pretty timeless, especially for post-apocalyptic fiction. That, my God, I mean, just the epic scale of what he's written, and you know, once you get through that, you're pretty much hooked onto horror literature for the rest of your life.
And it's hard to find a better villain in literature than Randall Flagg.
Yeah.
The Walking Dude also gave me a lot of nightmares. If I ever see Stephen King, I think I'm going to give him my therapy. What about you guys?
I have to say right now, and it's timely, Richard Matheson, who we unfortunately just lost. If you haven't read I Am Legend, you should yourself, every person in this planet should read I Am Legend at least once. I've read it 5 or 6 times. Then go beyond that, go to Hell House and read his works and read some of his short stories. He truly was a great master. And my favorite novel is actually Peter Straub's Ghost Story. And the movie is crap. It's worth seeing. As most movie adaptations do, they take a. There's some good ones.
The cast is the best.
The cast is the best part, and the fact that people may have seen the movie and then read the book is the best thing about it. But if you haven't read Peter Straub's Ghost Story, it still gives me chills to this day. It's brilliant. And also, if Stephen King, my favorite Stephen King is The Shining. And again, forget Kubrick's rendition. See the TV miniseries, which is much better with Steven Weber. It follows the book a lot more closely, and The Shining is, again, it's a masterpiece.
See, I think Kubrick's captures it.
I agree.
Yeah, the tone.
It's just the desolation and
But so many things are left unexplained.
yeah. So yeah, my favorite thing in the novel, which wasn't really touched upon, was just Jack Torrance's relationship with his father.
Right.
It's just such a good.
It's a classic of the, everybody has my favorite King novels in a sense.
But you took 2 of my favorite books, which is I Am Legend and The Shining, which were 2. So I'll go to my third, which is Shirley Jackson, The Haunting of Hill House, which also, since we're talking about the movie too, the original The Haunting is one of the scariest movies I've ever seen in my life. It's black and white, there is absolutely no gore, but that movie just still gives me chills today. Whereas the remake makes me want to punch my fist through walls, and not in a good way. But I agree, I Am Legend. Did you see Last Man on Earth?
Yes.
They've made, I forget the Will Smith version, that's got nothing really to do with the book. Omega Man, it's fun, but it has nothing to do with the book, but it's fun. Last Man on Earth captures the desolation and the scariness, I think, that the book did. And there's a moment where his wife comes back from the grave, and all you hear is, "Richard, let me in," and he's pounding on the door. He opens the door, and his wife is just, it's really creepy. My sister, who's not afraid of anything, gets creeped out by that moment, and it's also one of the inspirations for Night of the Living Dead. So.
That was Vincent Price, right?
Vincent Price, yeah. You can't beat Vincent Price.
And you know, the original Haunted, which is one of my favorite horror movies, that was directed by Robert Wise, who did West Side Story. So there's some truth.
But no one dances in The Haunting.
Yeah. Well, man, you guys picked all my good ones. I would, you mentioned it to talk about the Hell House.
Yes.
Hell House that is a disturbing book.
It truly is. It's groundbreaking. When you think when it was written.
Yeah, what was that, 71? Something like that? With that, I Am Legend, one of the things Matheson first started doing, which heavily inspired Stephen King, was he was one of the first guys to take these old world horrors, the haunted house, the vampire, etc., and put them in a modern American setting. And then on top of that, he added science. In I Am Legend, he goes, the character, I can't think of his name offhand, but he's...
Neville.
Yeah, Neville. He's investigating the science behind vampires. Hell House, while today it's a little wonky, it uses the science of the paranormal at the time. And in a a way, even influence, you know, like the Spade and Ghost Hunter shows.
It absolutely.
But that was also the first book I read that really combined sex and horror. And yeah, that's when you want to take a shower after sometimes. Also, to talk about film adaptations, the Roddy McDowell film adaptation. Matheson also wrote the screenplay.
Yes.
I have to say, the film adaptation I went to see with my family, and maybe it's just our sense of humor, but everyone else was screaming during it, and we were giggling our butts off.
It's a little melodramatic.
Yeah.
So, from a modern perspective, you know, we've had a lot of novelists really burst on the scene in the past couple of years. What would you say are the modern classics? Say anything in the last 10 years that you would say that, you know, when we're all in an old folks home, we're going to be like, I can't believe you've never read this.
So we can't say Stephen King, right?
Yeah.
Ray Garden.
Oh, okay.
Ray Garden, Jonathan Mayberry, Joe McKinney.
Joe Lansdale, for sure. I think Joe Lansdale is possibly one of the greatest. If you haven't read Joe Lansdale, change that immediately. He's one who, he's just an absolute master. You have to read it to believe it, and what he gets away with in the written word is insane. I think he's one of the great contemporary masters.
Start with the drive-in if you're going to go Joe Lansdale.
Yeah. You should read Joe Lansdale. He should be a household name, and he probably is. Hopefully in this circle, but he deserves to be.
He's well on his way to reaching that title.
He is on the way, and he well deserves it. And if you haven't heard of him, just change that, and you will be hearing from him in the future.
He's got a few books in the dealer's room with Lansdale stories.
Yeah.
So,
Include one of my own anthologies, Dark Tales of Lost Civilizations.
Shameless.
Includes Lansdale. Well, as far as that, books to read of the past 10 years, I mean, speaking of Joe Lansdale, Edge of Dark Water was just beautiful book, and it's something, if you liked Stand By Me by Stephen King, here's Edge of Dark Water from a girl's point of view. And it's just like the Huck Finn story of a girl running away from home with her friends on a raft trying to escape down the river and being followed by a serial killer, where they have like this basically loot that they have found under a grave. Real genius. Tying into Lansdale, but
I'd throw Joe Hill into that.
Oh,
yeah. You know, it's come out the past couple of years that he's Stephen King's son, so it's no surprise that he's a fantastic word writer. But 20th Century Ghosts, which is a collection of short stories by him, absolutely amazing. Heart-Shaped Box, I really recommend. I think that just got purchased by one of the studios for an adaptation, but it's about an aging death metal rocker who collects funeral and death memorabilia that he buys online, and he buys what's supposed to be a haunted suit, and he thinks it's a joke, and of course it turns out it's not. That's a really good novel. I haven't read Nosferatu yet, his new book, but that's fantastic. And I also like the guy because he doesn't, usually you read all this bullshit when somebody has a famous dad, and they're like, my father never helped me and I did it all on my own, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah, I'm Stephen King's kid. It helps.
he's got a great attitude.
And what's
Yeah,
spooky, if you see a picture of him, he looks exactly like his dad did 30 years ago. I've met him a couple of times, and it's spooky when you talk to him. He looks exactly like his dad does.
Especially when he hooked up the ear.
He's kind of like a sexed up version of his dad.
He's a little hipper.
Yeah, he's kind of a honey.
He's cool, but he's a sweetheart guy. He's a great talent. He got it on us.
Yeah.
This is why I'm on the panel, to add that perspective.
Yeah, if I said that, it would have been a bit weird.
So, you know, we've touched a little bit on some film adaptations, but a lot of people come to the genre through film. And I think you and I were talking about it earlier. A lot of horror film fans don't realize that there's a thriving horror literature. For horror film fans, what are some good movies that the novels smoke them out of the water? I think I just mixed some metaphors there, but you understand.
Pretty much everyone that's been made.
Yeah, but what would be, if somebody came to you and they're like, my favorite movie is X, you know, what's the book that you would say, oh my God, that's my #1 favorite horror film, but the book, 10 times better. What's the #1 you would tell them?
Well, I'm going to say The Shining. We're going to go back to The Shining because everybody loves the movie and the book is 10 times better. And pretty much anything that Matheson has written, it's, if you like the movie, you're going to absolutely love the book. And Ghost Story, again, I'm repeating myself, but give me a second, I'll be back.
I'm going to say just the very latest one I've seen, World War Z. The book and the movie are totally different things, but maybe that's not even a good comparison because if you love the movie, you might hate the book, but the book is just so much better.
Because the book's a series of interviews, right?
Well, the book had drama and tension stuff, and the movie was all shaky. So I probably make myself very unpopular with that opinion, but I'm going to go with World War Z.
Actually, that was the very first thing I thought of too, just because, I mean, it's in the news and there's such mixed reviews on the movie, but oh my god, the book has absolutely nothing to do with the movie, it's just completely different, but the structure of it, it's so fascinating, following the kind of the inception of the virus and going through the whole history and then the aftermath, and it really just, it talks about all the different people's lives and different cultures around the world and how everybody kind of dealt with it at the same time. But another one, The Road by Cormac McCarthy, came out at the start of Viggo Mortensen. Really good. It was a really good movie, and it was, oddly enough, the dialogue is exactly word for word from the book. Until the ending. The ending, they had a little bit of a different ending, but of course the book is just so much more expansive. I mean, that's the kind of a book, it's just such a, you don't really think of Cormac McCarthy, who also did No Country for Old Men. You don't think of him necessarily as a horror author, but this is just the most grimmest, starkest, post-apocalyptic vision of the nation. And it's just the story of his father and his son, kind of their relationship as they're going through and battling, you know, cannibals and starvation and his descriptive prose of the horrors is just, man, it's almost unlike anything I've read before.
Now that touches on a good topic too, because there are a lot of horror novelists who people don't think of as horror novelists. They aren't classified as horror novelists. McCarthy is one who, especially with The Road, slips into that. Chuck Palahniuk,
Yeah.
I always think of. He considers himself a horror novelist, if you talk to him, but he's not marketed as one. People don't think of him as one. But what's Fight Club if not Jekyll and Hyde?
Yeah.
You know,
Joyce Carol Oates.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Jack Ketchum.
yeah.
Oh, he's pretty soft.
You know, and
It's a fan.
yeah.
Except for Red.
But we haven't mentioned Ketchum either. That's
We just
somebody
did.
that I think.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I'm glad you brought him up because that's somebody that I think anyone who's wanting to dive into the genre.
And The Girl Next Door.
Oh yeah.
Disturbing.
That's
Possibly the most disturbing book I've ever.
Needs to be read. Recently released.
You know, an author that we haven't mentioned yet, and one of my favorites, but Clive Barker. Just talk about someone that everybody's heard of, but maybe hasn't read, and that definitely changed the feel of horror for better or worse. But you know, most people know Barker's work with Hellraiser. But The Hellbound Heart is a fantastic novella. But his books of blood, his collection of short stories that he first published, that's got some of my favorite short stories in it. Along with you, I'm a huge fan, and they were very inspirational to me. Night Shift, The Night Read, Skeleton Crew by Stephen King. But yeah, Barker's books of blood, there's just fantastic stuff. And again, talking about melding sexuality in a new way.
Great secret show, right along the line. That's one of my all-time favorite books. Yeah, the tying in the sex and the horror and just the stuff that I read. I'm like, oh my god, I hope my mother never sees me doing this.
Yeah, I think we should. We're running down to the end of it. So we'll open the floor for questions. If anybody has anything they would like to ask us, or if you just want to talk about your favorite book for a moment.
Yeah, what do you guys think about H.P. Lovecraft?
Oh.
Haven't heard you guys mention him. I'm going, why not?
Right, and that's a whole other panel. That's why. Once you start talking about it, it'll go on and on.
I'm a big fan of his. I like Stephen King.
To repeat the question, he asked about H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah, Lovecraft's incredibly influential. I'll let these guys talk about Lovecraft, though, because I have a little bit of a controversial view on Lovecraft. I think his ideas were amazing. He was a horrible writer.
He just gets a little verbose at times.
Well, his characters are flat.
Wasn't August Derleth? actually wrote a lot of the stuff that
Yeah, most of
you
what
think
people think of
is Lovecraft
is
is derelict, and he's a much worse writer than Lovecraft. I like
I
Lovecraft.
agree. I've read his Lovecraft stories, and they're not as good as.
Lovecraft is. I read all of his books and probably some of Derelict too one summer when I was sunbathing out by my parents' pool, and it was a very interesting contrast. You know, the Stygian Eldritch world of Lovecraft and the nice sunny pool and all that. But he's unique. He brought something that no one else brought to it, and I found it extremely nightmare inspiring. And if you've ever seen the H.P. Lovecraft Society's movie Call of Cthulhu,
yeah, I have.
Whisper in the Dark.
That was a fantastic movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are really good.
That was
Made on
great
no budget.
adaptation.
So,
Yeah.
Anyone else?
What do you think of Twilight?
I'm leaving this panel.
I think I'm going to say one thing about Twilight. I tried to read them. I could not. However, those books got so many people to start reading and move on to better books that I say, yay, barely veiled Mormon prophecy.
Yeah, and I'll say the one good thing about this, as I've heard discussed before, is that it kind of crossed a generational gap, whereas it brought mothers and daughters together that was kind of bringing their family together to talk about horror. And, even though it's something that a lot of us can kind of go from a literary sense we gag on it, but yeah, it created public interest, public appeal, and it opens the doors to their thoughts, and who knows? I'm sure there's going to be a number of young female authors down the road that's going to say, "What inspired me to start writing?" And they're going to go back to Twilight.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Anyone else?
Talking about Twilight, what do you guys think of? There's another book series. I guess they're going to make a movie. It's coming out this August. The Mortal Instruments. What do you think of those? Because I've read them. They're a lot. To me, they're a lot more horror-like than
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that.
than Twilight.
Oh, yeah, he was asking about
New series. It's been out for a while called Mortal Instruments. I'm just wondering what.
Who's the author of that?
Sandra Clare?
Sandra, yeah, Claire, that's her name.
That is a trend, though. I mean, young adult fiction is leaning very heavily into horror. And it's, in some ways, kind of an arbitrary distinction to call it young adult. I mean, half the books we read when we were a kid, I mean, it, aside from that bizarre orgy scene, could have been a young adult.
Exactly.
But, we've got these kids growing up on this now. They're going to be the horror fans, in 5 or 10 years.
But some of it, like Twilight's not that good, but this stuff I'm reading, it's actually kind of fun. There's some other stuff coming out that's not too bad.
I just read a book that comes out in July called Contaminated by M. Garner. Very, very good book. I highly recommend it. It's kind of a unique take on the zombie novel, but it's a YA novel. Anyone else? All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out. A couple of us are going to stick around and do some readings of our work. So if you'd like to hang around.
And come
yes, and our books. I guess we should talk about that. So Eric, what do you have on display here?
I have a novella entitled Baggage of Eternal Night. Again, available at the Horror Writers Association table. And in fact, I'm going to do a reading of the first few pages, about still 8 minutes worth to spread the good word.
And this is my first novel, Darling. We have copies in there also. Fangoria just did a review on it and compared it favorably to early Stephen King, so I'm going to write that high for a while. But yeah, come check it out. Paul.
And this is my latest collection. It's actually like a best-seller of stories I've been doing the last 10 years. Mostly short fiction, takes 2,000 to 3,000 words on average. These stories available for sale across the board. Come check it out.
And these are my Ashley Parker series, and though they do look like if the heroine turns around, she's going to have a tramp stamp, these actually are hardcore zombie novels, as well as, Buffy meets The Walking Dead. But I've had some really good works from Jonathan Mayberry and Joe McKinney, who are, street cred guys in the industry, so it's not just
Well, again, thanks everybody. I want to thank Eric, Paul, and Dana. And if you'd like to hear some of our crazy, morbid, disturbing readings, stick around.
Thank you, Brad. Well done. Good job.